Oh, yes, of course. Rory. Nice to meet you. Rory. Rory. Okay. From Arab. Sarah? Arab? Arab. Yeah, sorry, it's the math. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hello?
You've got me on this one, haven't you?
Hello?
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay. Welcome, everybody, to another great event in the Nature Positive Pavilion. We're really happy to be here with you today. I'm Harriet Bulkley. I'm a professor at Durham University and at Utrecht University, Durham in the UK, not the US one, and Utrecht in the Netherlands. And together with Rory and Danny, we've been organizing this session. It's inspired by some work that we've been doing with the Science Based Targets Network to think about how we can start to set science-based targets for nature for the cities group. So this is work that we've been discussing for many COVID years online, and we really love the opportunity to get ourselves together and also to invite colleagues working in this space from other organizations to join in this conversation to think about what could be the role of standards and targets in driving ambition and action as cities and indeed regions come to implement the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Of course, we've all still got our fingers crossed that there will be such a framework, but we're going to assume that there is, and then think about implementation. So today's session is an hour long. We're going to have two panels. The first panel that I'll introduce in a minute is going to focus on how standards and targets are being used by cities within the urban region, and thinking about how that can improve both the quantity and quality of nature in cities. And we're going to think about some of the opportunities and challenges there. Each speaker is going to speak for 3 to 5 minutes. Some have slides, some don't. And then we'll open up for a little bit of discussion. And then we're going to have a second panel who are going to think a little bit more broadly about what's the role of cities in trying to reduce their wider footprints on nature beyond their own boundaries. Potentially more, yeah, I don't know which one's more challenging. Maybe we'll know by the end of the session. But at least two different kinds of ways of thinking about standards and targets, what we're going to do today. Welcome to you all for joining us today, and I hope we'll have a good session. So yeah, just to introduce very briefly the speakers, they can say a little bit more about themselves in the order that they'll be speaking to us. So Stuart McGuinness from IUCN, who founded the Nature-Based Solutions Standard. He'll be leading our discussion first, and then François Moreau from the City of Paris. We're saying something about what this means in practice to actually try and do this on the ground. And then Rory Canavan from Arup will be saying something about what's the role of industry in relationship to standards and targets. And then Daniele Risi from ICLI Europe will be saying something about how cities across Europe and indeed globally are trying to develop standards to work with nature-based solutions as well. So Stuart, if I might invite you to start, sort of 5 minutes or so, and I will very gently approach you as time starts to run out, okay? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Harriet. So really what I'd sort of like to sort of start to approach this is really looking at how standards and targets are able to support urban action on nature. In fact, why do we need standards and targets, and particularly how we should be, how we can move forward to frame those. I think there's four reasons why we want to have again, and obviously standards being not something that we have to reinvent every time, but we can actually now start. We can roll out from city to city. Four reasons for this. I think number one is actually the consistency of approach, to really make sure that there is a coherence in practice, to really make sure that you see a good practice and good learning across different applications, and really actually to stop us actually having to invent the wheel each time. So there's really, I think the first real case for actually embracing standards and on the basis of those standards then being able to set targets, is this idea of consistency. The second is a coherency of purpose. And I think this is particularly important actually when you do get into subnational jurisdictions, into cities, because there's a real opportunity. I've been working for many years on nature-based solutions, and one of the real challenges for these integrated approaches is being able to work to get coherency across ministries and government. And a good example of that, for example, is always a struggle, let's say, between environment and agriculture. I think there's a real opportunity for coherency in subnational jurisdictions, in cities, working across city departments. But again, you need that framework to be able to move that forward. The third reason, and sort of this point has been made several times, is the great thing with subnational jurisdictions is the proximity to citizens. And so I think this another reason for standards and for then targets is that it actually does allows a connection with citizenry. It gives you a focus. It's exciting. It's inspiring. It can bring different groups together. Something that's actually, again, I would contend, easier to do than at a national level. And the final thing, which is important, is cost effectiveness. That it stops us. I mentioned this idea of when I talked of consistency, but this stops us actually having to reinvent the wheel, having to actually work this through time and again, starting from scratch. It gives a basis of learning. It allows us to actually exchange and improve. And so there's sort of four reasons, 4 C's: consistency, coherency, connection, and cost effectiveness. And there's a couple of examples that I would sort of use with this. First of all, and it's a piece of work we're committed to, nature-based solutions. There's a lot of interest in that at the minute. We've got a strong nature-based solution standard. It offers a high degree of integrity. It is about ensuring engagement and consent and involvement and agency of individuals, citizens. It was written, I spent all my life in a rural situation, so when I was a part of the team writing and facilitating this, I was thinking of indigenous peoples, communities, but it's equally the same, I think, with in an urban situation. So I think but what we've got to do now, and one thing that IUCN is committed to, is really to work now to have additional guidance for applying nature-based solutions in cities, and again, working with the network we have, with our commissions, etc., to really move that forward. The second thing, which I think is equally exciting, is the green list of protected, the green list of protected and conserved areas. This is a robust standard that actually is able to say these protected areas are fair and they're effective. And again, and I think the one thing that is exciting is the role of protection within the cityscape. If I can just conclude, I mean, I spent actually a country I know extremely well and spent quite a bit of time in this year was Rwanda. In Kigali, you're seeing these degraded wetlands, in fact some that had industrial estates built on them, being restored into very vibrant eco parks that are actually not only providing a green space and for citizenry, not only providing opportunities for biodiversity, but actually delivering real nature-based solutions such as flooding control. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Stuart. And I love the 4 C's and some great examples there as well. So yeah, Francois, maybe you could share a little bit with us about what's happening in Paris, 4 C's or otherwise, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Harriet. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Stuart. Well, yes, I guess that we all agree here that targets and standards are very important and crucial if we want to reach significant goals. In Paris, we have a biodiversity plan, very ambitious, with 30 different actions and many quantified targets. And this roadmap is a really powerful tool to involve our teams, our gardeners, all the city departments to get to that goals when they are many technical challenges or even citizen resistance in sometimes. For example, 20 years ago, the city of Paris decided to promote ecological management in its parks and gardens. And first thing was to ban the chemical inputs of all our parks. We have 500 in Paris, so we started in 2001 and achieved it in 2009. So all green spaces, but our cemeteries. And the cemeteries, it was harder because it was not in the tradition of the gardeners, even complicated for the public to understand. So there was a European regulation that made it mandatory to ban the chemical inputs from all the cities in Europe, and so we had to do it for that reason, and we managed to do it. So that shows that it's really important to have these targets and standards in our cities. And yesterday, our Deputy Mayor, Christophe Najowski, talked about that in the 7th Summit and made a call to ban the chemical inputs in all cities in the world. I think that would be a very key issue, a very important thing for biodiversity. So now the complicated challenge we have in regards to standards and targets is that, of course, we have very different realities in our cities. Last week we had a great event in Paris led by the World Bank called Cities for Biodiversity Deep Dive Learning. You were here, Harriet. And so we welcomed in Paris 50 different cities all around the world, mainly from developing countries. And most of these cities, they face the challenge of urban sprawl and how to protect nature areas. While in the city of Paris, which is very, very dense, very mineral, very artificial, the challenge is how to depave to restore nature in the city. So we in the end have the same challenge to protect nature and develop nature, but of course when it gets to numbers and targets and standards, it's really hard, complicated to have the same exactly the same framework. And that's exactly the kind of question that emerged in the work we had with IUCN on the IUCN Nature Index, Urban Nature Index. We worked with 5 other cities in the world on that index. One of them is Curitiba, which is a city in Costa Rica. And it's the first city in the world to be a full member of IUCN, along with the city of Paris. So again, we share the same goals, obviously, but it's a city of 30,000 people living with a density 5 times less important than Paris, which is the 6th highest density in the world for the city. So again, how do we have ambitious targets and standards that we can all share at different scales of territory, different density, different history, different geography? This is a hard challenge I think we have to face. So the important thing in that, I think, is to measure the progress, taking into account the reality of the cities, and to value what each city is doing. So I think the last question was, what do we expect from governments in that topic? So I won't be very original. It was said again yesterday on the 7th Summit. The first thing is the money. I mean, we really need the states to, as the cities and regions are in the first line, to protect nature, to control the illegal buildings or the deforestation, especially in the developing countries. We really need the support, the financial support of the states to help the cities and regions to achieve that goals. And of course, we need the standards to do so. But we also need international or national level to fix these targets and standards at an ambitious level, taking into account, as I said before, the reality of all our cities. And if I can just give one last example in that topic, in our biodiversity plan I mentioned before, one of our goals is to plant in all our parks and gardens 50% of native plants, because they are much better, as you know, for biodiversity. And it's very hard because Paris is well known for the Jardin à la Française, so a very horticultural tradition. So it's a complicated topic, and even to convince our colleagues in our department, the gardeners and the citizens and the politicians. So I think that if there were some kind of international standards and really pushing ahead to have this planting of native plants, I think that would be very helpful to help cities achieve this goal. And this can be a goal that could be applied to any scale of territory, region, cities or metropolis.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Francois. I think the issues that you raised there about the ambition that we need, but the fact that we're dealing with something that is inherently not standard, which is the urban, right? I mean, it's inherently never going to be a standard space, standard culture, standard approach to even what is native, right? Yeah. So we are dealing with a lot of diversity at the urban level, and how do we drive ambition, make something that can, you know, fulfill the kind of forces that you raised, but also deal with that diversity, and that's the challenge. So thank you for sharing that with us. Rory, we're turning over to you, and Rory does have a few slides from Arab, so if we could bring those up, thank you very much. And yeah, your experience of trying to do this practically, Rory, is going to be really helpful. Thanks.
Absolutely. Hello, and thank you, Harriet. Yeah, I'm going to tilt things a little bit in terms of, you know, our experience. So just by way of introduction, I work for Arab, and some of you may be familiar with the company. Effectively, it's a small, in the grand scheme of things, about 16,000 employees through the world, but small relative to other companies. It's a business, or it's a multidisciplinary design company in essence. And fundamentally, we're a little bit different because we're independent. That means we're employee-owned, so we've destiny, we've sort of sight of our own destiny, and that's really important to us. But actually, what we're really known for is cities. That's very much our stock in trade. That's what we do, is cities. And specifically, you know, all the constituent parts of cities that we, in terms of rail systems, actually design of new cities, master planning, etc. All of those parts. So what I wanted to do was just to provide a different perspective and our journey. So rather than necessarily talk about standards, to talk about what's happening at the coalface, how we're approaching things. Because there's variation there, and there's a actual risk in terms of standards becoming possibly redundant because of maybe higher levels of ambition on the ground. So I'd reiterate that. We work on the ground, so in many ways we're a barometer of how successful the interventions are. You know, we build things we understand. So just very quickly, it's not a plug at all for the company. I wanted you to just look at that axis, that line, that continuum. And that's really important because it's part of our sustainability plan. And that's our journey, that's Arab's journey at the moment. And it's moving from conventional, traditional design, sorry, it's a bit low, all the way through to regenerative design. So that's our mission. So we're here in the context of the Global Biodiversity Framework, hoping for agreement. And of course, we've sight of 2050, and indeed the vision, living in harmony with nature. But it's also worth considering cities. By 2050, and it's estimated that there'll be in excess of 6 billion people moving into cities or living in cities. So there's enormous challenges on the way for cities across the agendas in terms of the economy and equally environmental pressures, social pressures, etc. So for Arab, it's that regenerative design, that's our space, that's where we want to go. Just the next slide. Just unpicking that a little bit, and I appreciate it's a busy looking sort of diagram. Sorry, I shouldn't talk to the slide, but I'm just conscious that you can see it properly. But we are on this journey to regenerative design. Now, regenerative design, it's interesting. because obviously Tony's been talking about nature-based solutions, and it's one of those terms where maybe a little bit nebulous, different interpretations there, but it is about living systems design, minimizing impact from the built environment, but obviously cognizant and conscious in terms of maximizing ecological capacity and ecological gain. And it's very important that we're shifting, moving away from the business as usual, that sort of sustainability position on that axis back there or here. That's where we are at the moment, slowly moving into the restorative field. And that's probably through the lens of biodiversity net gain, environmental net gain, these mechanisms that are coming online. But it's important as well to recognize, again, another potentially nebulous term, and I hate saying this because, you know, in the context of where we are now, but nature positive. But fundamentally, regenerative design adds coherence to nature positive. It adds meaning to nature positive. It's effectively designing our systems to maximize that ecological gain and social outcomes, etc. And just very quickly in summary, as I said, it's from an industry perspective. Our regenerative design ultimately is a focus on design and strategy in essence, and an enabler for achieving these outcomes. That's really, really important for us. And understanding the link between human health, environmental health, well, that's integral. That's just integral to our approach. And as I said, shifting away from the status quo, but obviously moving to net gain, but moving beyond net gain, because our baseline is still descending. We've got to recognize that. So no net loss, net gain, etc. Net gain's buffering. That's just buffering the baseline at the moment. We have to move into that sphere of actual positive and more regenerative approaches. And indeed, certainly, as I said, alluding to the fact that our journey is towards regenerative design. So by 2050, for Arab, the objective is that all our projects are regenerative design. That's the aspiration, to move and commit to that sphere. And on that journey, that means particularly working very closely with Science-Based Targets for Nature on the city strand. That's a key objective for us. And I suppose it's maybe an obvious thing to say, but I guess it's worth recognizing that the quality of the world, the quality of the livability of our cities, the quality of the restoration, that's directly dependent on the quality of attention that we pay it. So that's really important. And I know it may seem obvious, but it's something integral to design and design-led approaches. So on that note, I'll finish. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rory. That was really great and really interesting to see this perspective from business, but also with that kind of long-term perspective on what it's going to take to be shifting to, as you said, this kind of regenerative approach. Thank you very much. Danny, please, over to you. You've got the last few slides for us. So yeah, if we can have Danny's slides from ICLEI. Great.
Thank you. Yeah, next one.
Maybe you could, yeah, okay, thanks for
So that's a lot of text. I'm just going to touch on some points. I cannot read what is on the slide, so I'm going to look a little bit here in my computer. So maybe to start, so I am working for ICLEI Europe. We are a city network, so it makes a lot of sense, this panel. I mean, I find it really nice how Harriet has mixed the different stakeholders here for us to have a productive conversation. The European Commission has been putting more than 400 million euros in projects for research and innovation on nature-based solutions. We are involved in a number of these projects because, of course, one of the main terrains for experimentations for NBS at the moment are cities, right? So that's why ICLEI is involved in many. And we have, coming out of all these projects, we have the task forces from the EC. And there's a particular task force on business models, governance, and it has produced an EC expert publication on the role of nature-based solutions in a nature-positive economy. And the idea of this publication was to raise the voice of, you know, these many, many projects that are producing experimentation and living labs, and show, you know, to policymakers, look, this is the work that we are doing on the ground, and this is the contributions that cities can make for nature positive. We have, in this publication, we have put a chapter strongly pushing for standards. And I know that each and every one in this room understands something different under standards. And this is one of the main points I think we should discuss a little bit in the discussion part. Like, we have indexes. So we have the IUCN index. We have the Singapore City Index. Then we have the standards related to constructive details. So the ones speaking to, let's say, Arab's work and the work of landscape architects and urban planners, and doing the design of these solutions, right? Then we have standards when we're talking to the markets. And then we have the EU taxonomy, we have disclosures. So we have a number of metrics out there that everybody knows that they are so important for nature-based solutions. But there is a little bit of, do cities know about the standards for the financial market for nature positive? Do the investors know about standards on the quality of design? So there's a little bit of a scattered, let's say, a pool there of different standards that we have to talk about how to, you know, make things a little bit more streamlined. And maybe next slide. You, Rory. You're adorable, thanks. So that was a little bit on the status quo. Next. That's one by one. Okay. So maybe let's put them. Yeah, so that's why I just flashed all of them. So some key considerations that we pushed for in this EC expert publication that I want to highlight here. Of course, we have to think about scale. Right? Scale is a very important point of standards. And I think this speaks a lot to what you talked about, right? For Paris was saying, so you have this complexity. You have NBS for designing a bus shelter, let's say, or bringing biodiversity and pollinators to that small scale. But then you also have huge wildlife corridors. And you have also the relationship with the rural areas. So how can standards, you know, span across these different scales? I think that's an important point that we have to talk about. Also, making sure that standards are being designed by different stakeholders. So we cannot, industry-led standards are important, but we cannot have some enterprises dominating the discourse, so that we have all the small and medium enterprises that are trying to deliver very nice solutions being led out of the discussion, right, for the creativity of these designers. There is also the point of credibility, right? So we have to see that we have accreditation schemes, that we have enforcement measures on the other side, but then enforcement measures cannot tie all the creativity coming up. And another thing that I want to talk about is replicability. What might work for some cities might completely not work for others, right? Because we have cities with different scales, different ecosystems, different climatologies, and also political settings. So I guess oh, she's looking at me. Yeah. So these are some points that I want to bring to the discussion. Thank you.
Do you want to do the next slide, or you?
I can, maybe the last one.
Yeah, it should be, and then.
No.
Oh, we're done.
Not one more. Yeah.
No. Forward
no,
again.
that was back.
And forward.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is the very last one. This is a work that the Network Nature Project has been doing on standards and NBS quality. So a wide consultation process happened for this with the voices of many different stakeholders on what is important. And one of the main things that came up was the importance to pin terminology around NBS and on the quality of design. So these are two major things that came out of the consultation.
Okay, thanks very much, Danny. I had the advantage of knowing what was on your last slide, so I thought we should get to that. So thank you very much for 4 really interesting and different takes on what standards might be, more from the global then to the local and industry, and then also from the perspective of multiple cities. And I hope you can see that by bringing these different stakeholders together, we're trying to see this in the round. So we have like about sort of 7 or 8 minutes now for some questions. If anybody's got anything that they want to raise, I can run around with a mic. If one of you gives me one of the mics, I think there's one there. Thank you. Perfect. So yeah, has anybody got a question that they want to raise? What do we want to know about standards? I'm coming to you because I know you want to know stuff about standards. Thank you very much.
Hi, Monja Kotter from ISO, actually, from International Standardization Body, so hence my question. I would like to know from any one of you where there is a lack of standardization at the moment and where there is a real need. We just created a new committee on biodiversity, so we would be really interested to know where there is a gap we could help to close.
Thank you very much. It was good to have you just right there for that question. Would anybody like to take that? Where's the gap? What are the challenges? I mean, we've heard, I guess, some of the challenges about working across scales.
I could take it, just giving my 2 cents, because I think everybody has something to say about that. So thinking about what is lacking, a lot is lacking. I mean, the first big lack, I would say, is around the terminology. We have gotten very wide feedback about, we know the problems around greenwashing, of you know, using the NBS umbrella term to pack things under it that are not NBS-y and are not helping biodiversity. So that's probably one of the main gaps that we can highlight. But of course, there are also gaps related to even constructive details. You do have some national standards, so I can mention here, for example, Germany is very good in green roofs. Grundstrat Grau in Austria is also doing very interesting work for standards. So you do have some industries that are a little bit more developed. But when you talk about NBS, it is so complex. We're talking about health and well-being. Right? We're talking about forestry. We're talking about services related, so the health and well-being part, to pick on that one. There's nothing on standards on that topic, right? So, and this part of the industry is asking for it, because if they don't have standards, they're not taken seriously.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else want to take that? Something that's missing? What do you think is missing from your perspective working in Paris? What do you want from standards? Do you want more standards or indeed fewer?
I think a related question to that is the question of the value of nature. I think we don't have enough standards to give kind of a price to nature. We always say that nature is priceless, but we have to have standards to help us measure what cities, for example, local governments are doing in favor of nature, and what the benefits of nature are to the cities and the citizens. I think that's really a complicated question that standards should help us to have this,
and possibly
framework.
related back to Danny's point, a way of kind of creating multiple values of nature as well. So not necessarily coming down to kind of one number. I guess that's not what you'd want to do, but rather recognizing that. I think Stuart has a point to say, and then I'm coming around that way. Good. It will work.
Just very quickly, Harriet. I think it's maybe a question is, are there gaps in standards, particularly on nature, biodiversity in cities, or actually is there a gap in the knowledge about what standards are there already, and particularly how they could actually be applied? Well, I say I've worked with some colleagues here on nature-based solutions and developing the nature-based solutions standard, and still I hear, oh, nature-based solutions, it's for greenwashing. Nature-based solutions can usurp the role and the rights of indigenous peoples or whatnot. that's written into the standard. You can't do that. So if you're doing that, it's not a nature-based solution. And I think maybe one of the things, and I think, Danny, you said this already, it's actually about actually knowing what is out there. It may be developed for a different circumstance, but then thinking about, right, how can it be applied? What do we need to do to tweak it and apply it and make it relevant for those particular situations? Thanks.
Great. Okay, I've got 2 more questions in the audience, so I'll ask for both of them. So if you could go first, please introduce yourself, and then I'll get maybe a quick response, because then we need to move to the next panel. So yeah.
Hi everyone, Scott Francisco from Cities for Forests. I'm just wondering how the demand side of the question of standards is influencing, because in some respects it's sort of like standards are a bit like data, like you can have more and more of them, but are they working together to do the job? And how's the demand side, like who's asking, and what are the roles that people see themselves who need the standards to demand the right kind of standards so that it all works together? So I don't know if there's a kind of map of that demand side of the equation as to where those gaps lie.
Not yet.
From who's asking.
Yeah. Who actually wants standards? That's the question. Do cities want them? Does somebody else want them? Please.
Hi, my name is Naoko Ishii, the University of Tokyo Center for Global Commons. My question is actually particularly for Mr. Arap.
Mr. Arap,
sorry.
Rory.
Because, well, I'm really interested in your saying that, you know, the city approach is going to more regenerative design. So, and that is really critical when the population is going to 10 billion and more. But my question is that how that standard really helps that each city trying to do that regenerative approach. So even I am not sure from that point of view, the standard is really helping or not.
Thank you so much. So yes, so both questions really connected to this idea of what are standards actually for, who wants them, and what can they achieve. So Rory, do you want to take that first one? Have I got all the mics? I seem to have all the mics. There we go. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, great questions. I think there's an element of brass tacks here, and it's effectively understanding the systemic values of nature, and we can badge it as co-benefits, natural capital lenses, etc., and so on. And I think that articulation and narrative isn't there, and that's where the consistency comes from. It's interesting because I'm based in the UK, and they're probably at the moment a bit of a forerunner in terms of introducing biodiversity net gain. So that's an uplift, and it's a standardized approach that every development will have to deliver. But actually, it's an onward journey to environmental net gain, and that's a natural capital lens, and that's really important because then you're able to tease out the co-benefits, and that's where you bring in the consistency. And as I said, it's that understanding the systemic values of nature, that's key to it all.
Okay. So if I can have a very quick response, maybe Danny, you can give me a quick response on who wants standards, and then I'm going to invite the other panel to come up. So you've got like, you know, half a minute, Danny.
I think everybody should want standards.
Okay.
And the reason for that is from the demand side, I mean, cities need them to make sure that they can put nature-based solutions into cities and not something else that people are packing under NBS. So to ensure design and ensure quality, so cities are interested in standards from that point of view. Okay. Of course, I'm talking about good standards, not the ones that that kill creativity and are a hurdle. Then why industries want standards? They want standards to make sure that their work is respected and that their things are going to function well, that they have a landscape architect that is designing it in the right way. So, you know, for quality. And then I could say others.
You could say lots more, and I think that may be something that will end up with the rest of the panel. But I'm going to have to ask everyone to come down from this panel. Thank you very much. Obviously, they'll be around for the rest of the session and afterwards. But if I could ask my other 3 colleagues who are going to join us now to speak a little bit more about how cities are working with standards within and beyond, like at the edges of their boundaries. So Hugo and Jennifer. Yes, please, you can, yes, I can see that you're on your way already, Sarah. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you. Nice round of applause. Okay, so there should be mics. So yes, let me introduce our 3 speakers in the order that they will speak to us today. Hugo Rosa Conceição, nearly, I almost got it right. Jennifer Ray Piers and Sarah Wilson. So Hugo's going to go first, and you don't have slides, do you, Hugo? Okay, is it right? Okay.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hugo Rosa from CDP. I'm just going to first talk a little bit about CDP for those who don't know the organization. CDP is a global environmental nonprofit that focuses on environmental disclosure. We also provide insights for policymakers and investors to help drive environmental action. This year, CDP had over 18,000 companies and over 100 states and regions disclosing our platform, and around 1,100 cities disclosing to CDP ICLEI track. CDP has a partnership with ICLEI to have our disclosure platform for cities. The questionnaires cover climate change, commodity-driven deforestation, and water security. We don't have a biodiversity-focused questionnaire. The questions on biodiversity are spread around the questionnaire, but this is an area that's becoming more important for CDP work as well. So I'll talk a little bit about CDP's work with cities regarding standards and targets. Our work with cities shows that standards enable cities to align their efforts with the scientific consensus and on how to set targets that are in line with internationally recognized tools and methods. That speaks a little bit about the need for consistency that the previous panel talked about. Cities also mentioned that the standards help them justify their decisions to the elected politicians and to their citizens, and there has a possibility also to help them attract finance, which is also a very important topic mentioned before, to attract finance from investors and from national governments to ensure that their environmental actions are well based on a good level of financial support. The work of CDP with cities also identified a couple of challenges that cities face in setting standards and targets. Of course, there are many challenges there. I'm going to highlight 3 of them here. And they come from our work with climate. Like I said, CDP doesn't have the questionnaire on biodiversity yet, but our insights on climate can also be very useful for further work in nature as well. So the first challenge that cities face is that they don't have direct control over the emissions that happen within their boundaries. 1 in 4 cities that reported to CDP said that their citywide emissions targets were conditional to the success of policies that they don't have control over. The second challenge is lack of financial support. 1 example of that, also from CDP's disclosure, is that 132 environmental infrastructure projects reported by cities in Africa indicated an investment need of around $3.7 billion. And the third challenge, that's a need for technical guidance. I think it's also a need to help them navigate this maze of standards that were discussed in the previous section. The final point I want to make here is what can national governments do to support cities? There's obviously a lot that governments can do to support cities, but I'll talk about 3 areas that also came from CDP's engagement with cities. Again, this comes from our work on climate, but we think that this will also be relevant for biodiversity in nature. The first is, once again, finance. Cities reported a need of financial support to curb the emissions that happened in their boundaries, and they also need financial support to do biodiversity nature-focused projects. The second is support for innovation on innovative climate action technologies, for example. And when cities work with, if they want to do innovative ecosystem-based approaches, nature-based solutions, they also need support from the governments. The third are robust decarbonization policies, especially the ones that focus on sectors like transport and energy that are emission intensive, and for nature, policies on sectors like agriculture, which have a very strong impact on biodiversity in many areas of the world. And the last support that cities need from governments, and I think the reason why we are here, is to adopt a strong global biodiversity framework that gives cities the importance that they deserve, and that indicates that governments should provide the support the cities need to bend the curve on biodiversity loss.
Thank you very much, Hugo. And I think one of the important things there is that we're also not reinventing the wheel with learning the lessons from standards and standard development as well, because we have such a long experience of doing that. And I know it's very popular for people in the biodiversity world to say, oh, well, climate change is easy because you've just got one thing to work with, and that's greenhouse gas emissions. But actually working out where those emissions are in a city and how to actually reduce them is quite difficult, and we know that cities are struggling with that already. So what can we learn from that and feed that into the process of developing standards with nature? So thank you very much for sharing that, Hugo. Jennifer, over to you, and Jennifer's is the PDF, please. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Jennifer Ray Pierce. I'm here representing the Urban Biodiversity Hub. We host the world's largest and most comprehensive database on urban biodiversity actions at www.ubhub.org. Come and check us out. So I'll be sharing with you some lessons from the work that we have done researching that database. So next slide, please. First of all, when we look at what cities are doing for urban biodiversity, the first thing that we observed is that their view on what biodiversity is rather limited to what is within their boundaries, because this is what cities are accustomed to thinking about. So we're encouraging them to find measures that think about this entire framework that you see here in the diagram on the slide, not only what's within their boundaries, but also how they impact their hinterland, those markets that come in and out, agriculture and others, and also their global impact as trade centers, and then within various sectors. So they're not only in the traditional conservation realm, but also in areas of consumption, production, pollution, and then also societal impacts. So cities do set up a lot of behavioral norms, consumption norms, and things like this. So these are all areas that cities have huge outsized impacts, and things like the ecological footprint try to capture this. So right now, cities are requesting standards and supports that are flexible and work for their context. And we're encouraging them back with the challenge of, okay, let's think about biodiversity comprehensively. So as was mentioned earlier by Paris, who was one of our the pilot cities for the Urban Nature Index, this index is an IUCN knowledge product that we were part of the development team for, and it uses this framework. So you can take a look there at the 6 themes that the Urban Nature Index does that attempts to capture this full circle of actions. So the next thing I'd like to bring up is a policy brief that we released this last year in partnership with several groups, including Naturevation, thank you, Harriet, and also IUCN, and ICLEI as well. So I should acknowledge that. So this policy brief takes the national approach and asks what can nations do to support and aggregate actions at the local level. And it's based on the GBF targets. So next slide. So we looked at several of the targets in the post-2020 GBF framework and gave the results of our research into what cities are doing. So that you'll find in the first column, which I know you can't read, but you'll go and look at the PDF, right? So you have the current practice that local governments are doing, and then where are the accelerators? Where can nations come in and take the things that cities are doing and multiply that, replicate it, and aggregate it at the large level so that they can use the things that cities are doing to contribute to their GBF goals. So this policy brief is designed to assist with that process. So if you're interested, please take a look.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. That's really, really interesting to share. And I think it also shows us just the challenge of actually navigating and translating. There's so much translation to be done between the targets and indicators that are being set at one level, and how does that actually then work for cities. And we need to do that translation as well as kind of navigate the maze that you said earlier. So yeah, please, Sarah, after you. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm thrilled to be here today on behalf of Cities for Forest, which is a network of cities that I co-founded along with others at Pilot Projects and the World Resources Institute in 2018. Cities for Forest is a network of cities who have committed to restoring, conserving, and improving their management of forests within their boundaries, but also outside. So both forests around cities, but then also those forests around the world that people in cities often don't even see. And one of the things that we've done over the past few years is produce a report called Better Forests, Better Cities. And this report summarizes the evidence base for basically why people in cities really need forests at all scales. And one of the things that we found in that report is that in terms of biodiversity impact, the real gain that cities have to make is looking at the biodiversity outside of their borders. You can improve biodiversity within a city, no question, but if you're talking about global biodiversity conservation, it's really looking outside the city that cities need to do. And this is in large part via their consumption. Cities consume the lion's share of the world's resources. So, you know, with about 60% of the world's population, they use 70% of the world's energy, and that's a proxy for other resources as well. So one of the major ways that they, you know, lead to that cause deforestation is through the consumption of deforestation risk commodities like beef, soy, palm oil, etc. But this impact is often invisible to people living in cities. They're far away from these forests. They don't really have any concept of the impact. So one of the tools that we've developed, if you go to the next slide, is the forest footprint for cities tool. It's like the ecological footprint, but it uses consumption data of forest risk commodities to show the per capita impact of a city on tropical forests. And the interesting thing about this tool is that it breaks it down by different commodities, so a city can sort of see like, oh wow, we're consuming a lot of beef. If we dialed that down, how much would that reduce our annual deforestation? And this is really intended as a tool for cities to understand their impact, to be able to talk to their residents about the impact, and then also to look at where they might make changes. And so an example of application, if you go to the, just click again, is in Medellin, Colombia. The city here was looking at, we calculated this comparison of different ways that they could reduce their carbon emissions, right? So on this side of the graph, you have the urban trees and the avoided emissions basically due to their urban trees. So that's urban trees now. That's if they maximized all the urban trees in the entire city, so they planted trees everywhere they possibly realistically could. But on the far side of the graph, you see the impact of reducing their forest footprint by only 5% on avoided carbon emissions. So you can see that just by reducing their consumption of forest risk commodities by 5%, they would have a much larger climate impact than maximizing urban trees. And this is something that you would also see with other metrics, potentially like biodiversity. So next slide, please. So once cities have this information, we've created a 10-point action plan for what they can do with this data. I'm not going to go over all the 10 points, but for example, they can improve their procurement policies, right? Making sure that all their wood comes from really well-managed forests. They can regulate forest risk products, so making sure that that they're only bringing in certified goods and so on and so forth. I do want to touch on one specifically, which is the Partner Forest Program. Next slide. Oh, and sorry, this just shows like the cities that are actually acting on the different initiatives, but that's okay. So the Partner Forest concept is the idea that of connecting a city directly to a forest, faraway forest, where communities and people are doing exemplary work in forest conservation and management, and supporting that area through the consumption power of the city. So for example, there's a cloud forest region in Integ, Ecuador, that's producing really good shade-grown coffee. A city could partner with them and say, we're going to source our coffee from you and therefore support this forest. The most interesting example of that is actually one that has not been implemented yet, but it is the Brooklyn Bridge Partner Forest. So the Brooklyn Bridge in New York City has an iconic boardwalk that's always been made with tropical hardwood, most likely unsustainably sourced. Every 35 years, that hardwood needs to be replaced. And so the idea is to source that wood from a forest in Washington, Guatemala, who's doing really, really good forest management. They are harvesting at a very low rate and using the revenue from that harvest to support the forest itself and then also to support a conservation area. So it's a really neat example. And then this would not only allow the city to support this forest, but it would bring the idea of consumption and the power of positive consumption into the hearts and minds of the people living in New York and all the other people around the world who pass over that boardwalk. So like I said, this hasn't been implemented yet, but it did capture the attention of the New York City Council. It was awarded the top prize for the Reimagining Brooklyn Bridge design competition a few years ago. So we're hopeful that this will this will come to being someday soon. So I'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting. And so we're sort of moving from thinking about what lessons can we learn from climate to kind of think about the way that cities can address their footprints, some of the ways of translating global goals into what cities are doing locally, but also then what that effect has more globally, and then some really practical examples of the kinds of things cities can actually do to connect to faraway forests. So thank you all very much for sharing that. We have maybe 6-7 minutes for questions. As you can see, they're getting ready for reception drinks after this, so that's good, isn't it? It's not our session, but I'm sure that the organizers of the next session wouldn't mind at all if you stayed, because it's going to be about how do you value nature and put a price on it. So that's going to be good. But I can see there are questions, and I've only got one microphone at the moment. Can I have another one? Thank you. Very good. All right, I'm coming. So yes, all right. I think you were first. You were. Hello. How are you? Good. Nice to see you.
Hi. No, my question
Could
is...
you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, José Pupin, FGV, a think tank in Brazil. My question is more urban agriculture. You know, we did this work, and then you refrain from calling nature-based solutions, exactly because some people think that's not actually exactly nature. What is the role of urban agriculture in the city and links with biodiversity?
Thanks, Jose. Could you pass this to a colleague here, and if you ask your question as well, and then I'll get...
It's very different.
That's absolutely fine. This panel are great. They can do 2 different questions.
Great. So this is related to this. Sorry, I should introduce myself. Dawn Smith, City of Calgary.
Can you hold it a bit closer? Sorry, you're a bit quiet.
Dawn Smith, City of Calgary. Better. This is related to CDP reporting, and I'm just curious about kind of standards related to reporting and how your guys' organization sees your work related to the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure and the Task Force related to nature-based solutions as well, and how you think this is all going to come together related to accounting reporting frameworks.
Thank you so much. So, Hugo, do you want to take that first? Yeah, thank you. So we've got all of these global bodies developing standards that they all want people like the City of Calgary to use. What does that actually look like on the floor in your office, I guess? There should be one there. Thank you.
Hi. So since we're a disclosure organization, full disclosure from my side, I am not in the cities team of CDP. I'm working in the policy team. So I'm going to respond to you, our work with TCFD and TNFD more on the corporate side, because that's the one that I'm more involved with. On the TCFD side, CDP's questionnaire is fully aligned with the TCFD framework. In the TNFD framework, CDP is working very closely with TNFD. We are a knowledge partner of the development of the TNFD. And we started exercising some mapping of the questionnaires against the framework of the TNFD as well. And the idea is that in the future, when the TNFD is finalized and completely ready to be implemented, that our questionnaires will be as aligned as possible with the TNFD as well. I'm unfortunately not going to be able to respond that in the context of cities, but you can come to me later and I can direct you to our cities team that can explain to you more.
But it reflects back on this question of this kind of emerging kind of explosion of standards and indicators. Yeah, exactly. Well, there's those 3, but there are more. So, now, can we think about urban agriculture? Jennifer, I was going to ask you if you could respond to that.
Sure. I have a quick comment on the previous question.
Okay, well, then you can do both.
That's okay.
That's fine. I promised the audience you could do both, you see.
So, great. So regarding the explosion of systems for measuring, this was one of the things that I said when we were first working with IUCN on the Urban Nature Index, is like, oh no, not another standard. Please don't tell me that's what it is. And so what we worked on there was how can we bring together existing standards into a framework that cities can do. So the Urban Nature Index is flexible in that it doesn't work on indicators, but rather indicator topics. And each indicator topic is fulfilled by many different potential indicators that the city can select based on their context. So there are suggested indicators that a city can use, or they can also suggest an alternative for IUCN to review and approve. So I look forward to working with groups such as the 2 that are up here to provide guidance on how their standards link into the Urban Nature Index, like we've already done with the Singapore Index and other similar standards. So that is the hope, that it would be incorporating these various standards into one.
Yeah, and so is agriculture part of that whole framework?
Absolutely. So on your question, thanks, Jose, for the urban agriculture question. There's a couple of things here, and I believe that maybe my colleague would want to talk about this as well, because agriculture impacts cities in more than just what's grown within its boundaries. And so on the Urban Nature Index and the other work that we do, we're looking not only at what is grown within the city, but actually what are people consuming within the city. And people that have measured climate footprint, they see that there's a footprint associated with certain types of diets. But when you do the ecological footprint, that the impact of diets within the city is even bigger. And cities are shocked to see this when they see how large their footprint is in terms of what people are eating. And then they want to know, well, how do we change what people eat in our cities? We've never thought about that before. So yeah, it's a really interesting conversation. I'm sure it's the same with forests. So that's also part of it. In terms
Jennifer,
of, perhaps your question was about what's in boundary, and that is also important, particularly in terms of how people engage with nature and seeing it not just as a recreational, nice thing for leisurely people to do, but actually something that we consume, that feeds us, that builds us, in many ways as full human beings. So I think it's important in those ways as well as the way that it reduces potential footprints. Okay.
Sarah, would you like to respond also on the agricultural side?
Yeah, sure. Just really quickly, I mean, I agree with everything you just said. And also, I think like urban forests, urban agriculture has a real potential to. Okay, it's limited in its potential to provide food, right? You can provide some food to a city with urban agriculture. You're never going to provide all the food to a city. It's just not practical with the land values and the amount of land available and how much it costs to do certain types of agriculture within cities. But there's a huge value in using urban agriculture to provide some food and to connect people in cities to their food, right? The same way when you have an urban forest, there's a lot of value there in just connecting people to nature and helping them to think about nature outside of the city and how that also affects us. So I think, just in terms of giving people the ability to grow some of their own food is very empowering and just provokes a lot of different thinking about food, right? So that's, I mean, to me, that's the biggest value of urban agriculture, is making it accessible to people to get out there and actually get their hands dirty and discover food in a new way, right? So.
Hey, right. Well, I'm very sorry that I'm going to have to now bring this to a close. I can see my colleagues who run the Nature Positive Pavilion. Thank you very much for hosting us today. We really appreciate it. And thank you very much to all of the panelists. Please, let's give them all a really big round of applause. It's the start of a conversation, and let's carry it on. Thank you all.